Hey, it's Matt from Black Coal Woodworking. Welcome back. Today I'm making a bird feeder. Yeah, it's kind of in the middle of winter for us here, but there are birds. Figured I might help them out a little bit. To start off, I found this idea or plan at turning for profit, and I figured I'd try it out. It's not anything I'm going to turn for profit because this thing took me a very long time. I just wanted to try it for fun because it looked like a good challenge, and that it was. I spent some time marking out where I needed things to go. Future me will realize that this was very wrong, but current me is just going with it because I've never made one of these before, and I'll have to fix it later. I find myself tending to want to do projects that could use a skew chisel just because it is the most fun tool I have to use. And the principles behind using it have made all the rest of my turning that much better too. The spot I'm working on now is actually going to be the top of the bird feeder. It's going to be kind of a thin, spindly kind of handle, I guess, or stick that I'm going to use to hang from a tree. So you'll find me skipping through a bunch of stuff here. Like I said, this bird feeder took me a long time, and once I've kind of shown you what I'm doing for a certain area of the bird feeder, you'll kind of get the idea that I did a rinse and repeat on things, like these beads, for example. I'm basically just showing how terrible I am at making beads, so we'll skip through most of it to the actual good spots, or at least good for me. The spot that I'm working on now is where the cap of the bird feeder will come down and sit on. So I would put the cap on from the right side of the screen there, and it would rest on that little shoulder, I guess we'll call it. Obviously, to get that cap down, I've got to thin out the rest of this handle or top part of that spindle. And there we go. After cutting it with my, I guess we'll call it a parting tool, beading and parting tool, which I don't actually use for beading, I wanted to smooth it out with the skew before I got into any sanding. Here I'm using a peeling cut with the heel of the skew just to extend the top of that a little bit more. Here's another attempt at a small bead, and in this small bead I don't actually show it later, but that's where I put a tiny little drill hole right through the whole thing, and I stick a wire through there so I can hang it from a tree. On to the bottom. Now, the bottom part, I'm going to have a finial on the bottom, a very basic kind of finial, but the idea behind that finial is to keep the bird feeder upright a little bit more, because if I'm thinking if it's more bottom heavy, there's less chance of swinging when a bird sits on it, or just a little more stable perhaps. Probably still lots of swinging. The finish I'm using is walnut oil, shellac, and beeswax. Now to finish off the top. Give it a bit of a round over there. I can pop the ends off and then nip the little piece left over off with the skew, because I managed to cut it down pretty thin without having the piece fly off the lathe altogether. I always feel pretty pumped about that. On to the base and the top. This is just pine 2x4, using a 1/2 inch spindle gouge to get this down to round. Figured if it's a 1/2 inch spindle gouge, I should be able to take off a 1/2 inch of wood at a time, so I'm trying. This part of the project is really just a simple but small bowl. I'm creating a foot so I can grab that with my 4-jaw chuck. I prefer the tenon as opposed to a recess. In this case, maybe I should have gone with the recess just because I wouldn't have to turn it around again later to cut it off. Once I've got my shape roughed out with the spindle gouge, I switch to a flat scraper. With a good burr on it, you get quite a nice finish, and it requires minimal sanding. Now for the part that always makes me a little nervous is purposely cutting a hole through the bottom of my bowl. So, using a drill to do that, I've got a Jacob's chuck in my tailstock, and I've done all the measurements so this should fit nicely so it rests on top of that finial. So once I've got it through the bottom, I went back through the top, trying to meet the hole in the middle. Now to cut the bowl out itself, I actually want to keep the hole with a bit of some material around it. That's what's going to support the bowl and keep it from rocking around when it's on that stick. You'll see me go back and forth with this bowl gouge here because I'm really trying to cut into the side grain, not the end grain. That's always so much easier to cut. So if I can cut straight into this bowl, it's far better for me than to try to come from the outside and go in. For the final cut, I switched over to a 1/2-inch spindle gouge, and that's mainly because the bevel angle just made more sense in this case, and I was taking a fairly small pass, and then it allowed me to get right to the bottom and clean up the edges where that center post is going to go. Now for the top. Really starts about the same way. Take off as much wood as I can on the corners, and then shape the top. So the top's going to be a little less deep than the bottom is. I wanted the top to look daintier, also to carry less weight, because I don't want the seeds spilling out of the bowl. I care even less about how smooth the top is. In this case, you'll see why in just a moment. And because I don't need all that tenon, this is one of the more fun cuts that I can do. Just to peel all that back. This next part took forever. That is just a plain piece of wood I'm holding there. It's a little rough, but I'm trying to basically start a fire by rubbing two sticks together at 1600 RPM. I don't know how cavemen ended up starting fires so many times. Anyway, I made the mistake of trying to see what the finish would look like by adding some finish, and that'll come back to haunt me in a little bit. Either way, I've still got to put a hole in the top, a smaller hole of course, and then I had the brainwave that I actually don't even need to have a 10 in there, so I'm going to take it away and try to deal with the mistake. Burning this part was incredibly hard. Now, that spot that I had actually applied finish to would not burn for nothing. I tried a lot. Finally, pushing the wood directly in on the end grain is the only thing that seemed to get the wood to darken at all. So I managed to get the middle there darker, but when you get closer to the middle, obviously the piece of wood isn't spinning as much as it is on the outside. So I didn't get to use all the heat that was generated when I did the outside on the inside, because I had this idea that I needed a tenon when I really didn't. And this is why I didn't need a tenon. I could pin the piece of wood to the four-jaw chuck with some soft kitchen stuff, whatever that is, to line your drawers with. It's grippy, and because I already have a hole in the bowl, it was great. Now that I have my bowls and the holes, I found out that the hole I drilled wasn't quite big enough, so I had to reduce the size of that spindle. It was still a little tight at the top, but when I got it down there, it worked fine. I'll end up taking that down at the top a little bit so it fits just a bit nicer. So this is where my big mistake showed up. As I put this on, I realized you could probably have an eagle sit on that thing and eat in there. That gap is just way too big. I miscalculated something. So I made a new measurement and made some new beads, and because the top of that spindle can be and should be a lot smaller than the bottom, I could cut it down and still be okay. So that's how I found I could solve this problem. Here you can see how I just managed to pin the finial into my four-jaw chuck, and I took the spike out of my tailstock and it just sort of had it resting in there, so it wasn't really pinned there, but it would stay steady enough that I could cut these beads. Got a catch or two, but it worked out. Now that I've got my new measurement for the top, I can use my parting tool again to create the right size of spindle there, and then clean it up once again with the skew. Time to do the fitting again. Let's see if I got what I wanted this time. Sure looks a lot better to start. I didn't think the gap was good, but my daughter did, so we kept it. And she was right. Now it's time to take the tenon off the bottom bowl. Here I'm using a small spindle gouge. I don't even know what size it is, it's just the smallest one I have. Alright, time to see the finished thing for the first time. My little helper handing me pieces. And yeah, that's way better. I could see birds eating in there. While I prepare to take this outside. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it, and if I've earned your subscription, thank you. See you next time.